Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Radiance Podcast hosted by the Jaffrey Academy. This evening, we're going to be exploring a topic that has grown with concern over the years and has been brought to the forefront more since the onset of the pandemic. And in fact, the pandemic is attributed to causing a rise in it. And this is stress in children. Now, adults are not exclusive to having stress. Stress happens in kids. In fact, it's so very much prevalent, so much so that there's been interim guidance that was released over the past few months by governing bodies, such as the American Association of Pediatrics. They released guidance to show how we can support children through the pandemic, and they even further went on to emphasize how the parents play a very important role in it. Now, while our discussion is not exclusive to the pandemic, it certainly adds flavor because this past year has brought together families in their homes under a time of which they're spending much, much more time together. It's brought about a change in circumstances, and it's brought about a lot of adjustments that we've all had to go through, especially the children. Previously, up until the onset, children were very much structured in their life, and they were guided by school and play until that turned on its head. Now, these changes, coupled with being together in our households, have made some of us sit upright a little bit more. We are thinking more. We're looking at our children more. We're wondering more. Are our children okay? How are they doing? These are the kinds of questions that parents, many like yourselves, have had on your mind for the past few months. And in fact, not just parents, a lot of research and people in the field of academia have also been asking these types of questions. And it's these types of questions that have set the foundation of the exploration of our topic this evening. The topic that's really important, stress in children. Now, we know naturally that in life, there is an ebb and flow. Changes occur, and with it, growth. Further changes occur, and with it, further growth. And while we accept and understand this ebb and flow, it is when this becomes heightened, and it's when this becomes a little bit more turbulent, then that further manifests itself as a stress in children. That is something that we need to understand further. Now, as parents, we've been gifted with these children, and we want to do our best by them. If they're going through something attributing to stress, we want to try and understand this. And through understanding it, we in turn will be enabled to help them better. I'm really pleased this evening to introduce our speaker who, with her knowledge and expertise, will guide us through this process of understanding the stress in children. Sister Azra joins us from Chicago, Illinois. She has an academic background in education and leadership and social work. She is the principal and founding member of the Hadi School of Excellence in the US of A. She's also a member of the Teachers Preparation Advisory Board at the National College of Education in the National College of National Louis University in USA, and a board member of the Council of Islamic North America. Sister Azra is a founding member of the Jaffrey Academy, and she's currently a member of its board of directors as well. And her contributions to the Academy and the projects therein have been multifold. And some of them include the project-based learning, as well as the mentor program in the senior years. Sister Azra, a very, very warm welcome to you this evening. Assalamu alaikum, and I pray that you are well.
Wa alaikum salam, and jazakallah khair for having me, Shabniz. I'm very fortunate and happy to be here.
Alhamdulillah. Now, Sister Azra, let's begin. Let's begin with this process of understanding stress in children. How does stress impact children?
You know, there is a really good question and a real one that we really need to understand and ponder over. As you were mentioning, that we are in this situation where we are confronted with so many challenges. COVID-19 had itself put us a spin on our lives. And as you were mentioning, that is true, that we are in a position where we need to really learn and understand how does that really impact children, because ultimately we want to know and we want to be able to make sure that our children are learning, they're growing, and there are some deterrent that that might cause undue effect on them. And before we do that, we want to first look at the brain, because ultimately that is where we want to be able to make sure that we learn right through our brain, and we want to make sure that uh, um, we look at the brain and just really understand that what is really going on in there. And being a part of Hadi School for about 18 years, and of course I have my own 4 boys that I raise, and it's just fascinating to kind of learn about what is really going on. And the research shows, and the scientists have really spent years and years trying to understand the human brain by looking at the EKG or the fMRI, where they scan the brain and they look for a few things, and they really want the educators to kind of know what really goes on. And it's astonishing to find that the brain of a child is what we call experienced developed growth. So the brain is so malleable, and the neuroplasticity, what they call, is very high in those children. And it is so influenced by the environment. So environments plays a big role in it. And what we need to know and understand, that how do we deal with it? And then we look a little bit more closely to this complex system in our brain. It is so complex that it takes a neurobiologist or neuroscience to understand. But just as an educator point of view, we kind of look at the limbic system, the part of the brain that focuses on 3 main areas. That is the prefrontal cortex, which is our front part of the brain, that is really responsible for our attention, our concentration, and just executive function. And another part of the brain that is called hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and retention. And finally, our part of the brain that really is affected is the amygdala, and that is responsible for emotions. So when we were talking about stress, and you asked me that question, how does that really, stress really affect? I wanted to say that when a brain, or when a child or anyone is affected by stress, the part of the brain that gets activated is called the amygdala, the part of the brain that is emotion. And sometimes it is good to be in this position where the brain is activated, the amygdala, where our what we call the fight or flight situation comes in. And we immediately take action, and we jump out of maybe a car that is heading towards, or confronted by a bear. We are actually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala installed that in our ability. But unfortunately, if that is too much in a person, then what we called a chemical that is called the cortisol, that is secreted in our brain, that actually deters them from learning. And the constant stress really damages the brain.
Okay. So Sister Azra, you raised some really interesting points. And before we go further, there's so much literature out there about stress. And to help us sort of focus on, channel our discussion this evening, can you sort of highlight, with given your expertise and your knowledge base over the past years, can you take us through some of the different types of stressors that children, that are identified with adults and children in a broad general perspective?
Sure. Being in the position that I'm in right now, like I said, really trying to understand what can we do to our children so that they're learning. We need to first figure out there are different types of stress, right? But I'm actually happy to report that there are some type of stress that is actually good for them. So stress is not always bad. So if we think about it,
that's good to know.
So there was a study that is done by the Center for Developing Child by the Harvard University, and as well as the book that I read that's called The Self-Driven Child, and they really kind of expand on what we call a positive stress. And positive stress is really a person or a child being able to put in a situation that they need to take a risk, or let's just say they want to jump into onto a stage and we need to perform. So it's like butterflies in a child's stomach when they get ready to perform or present, or maybe a teacher who gave a pop quiz and all of a sudden there's that little nervousness or little excitement, and really the cause of that motivation. And that is positive stress. And according to the brain research, when that happens, the part of the brain that gets activated is called the prefrontal cortex, which I just mentioned.
Yeah.
And that is that where they're very sharp and their ability to really move forward.
Okay. So that's good. That's one of them. So positive is a good thing.
And, so there's another stress that I wanted to kind of talk about, and that is called a tolerable stress. Because, yes, there is a positive stress, but then a tolerable stress is what they call a child or a person going through a brief grief. Or maybe, for example, a person who is confronted with maybe a child who witnesses their parents fighting, for example, or there is a brief bullying that might be happening in school, or a family member or death in the family. So there are a lot of situations that the child might be going through. Now, what makes it tolerable is the ability for a parent, a caregiver, or someone to be there to allow them to cope and recover. And that's a big piece. Cope and recover is an important part to make it tolerable. And and it's actually very believe it or not, that research shows that a child who goes through this kind of tolerable stress, coupled with the adult being there to support them, guide them, allow them to cope and recover, actually stimulates brain growth and allows for resilience. So this is a really good thing to have as well. And one of the things I wanted to just talk about is one of the experiment that was done by the neuroscientist. The National Science Council had did a experiment on rats. And what they did was they studied rats, and they actually had taken out baby rats from the mom for about 15 minutes at a time to hold them, which causes the rat to be, again, have that tolerable stress, feel they're stressful about it. But the 15 minutes, they pull them back to the mom. That allows the mom to cuddle and lick the baby. And they did that for a matter of a couple of times for the next 2 weeks for them. And what they found that, remarkably, these babies who were taken out from the mom for a short period of time actually build resilience, and they were much more resilient to stressors in their lives versus those who weren't taken out. And they found that this happened because the brain of those pups, those baby rats, were conditioned to coping with stress. So that kind of laid the foundation of what we call resilience.
Okay. So far we have positive stress, which is a good thing. Tolerable stress, which is also in effect a good thing because it helps us grow. It helps us build resilience. Any other types of?
Yes. So tolerable stress is good, but we need to really think about tolerable becomes tolerable because of the fact that there are supports that is involved. And unfortunately, there are also kinds of stress that is bad for the children's brain, their learning, and that's called the toxic stress. And toxic stress is really caused by frequent or prolonged activation of their stress hormones that we were discussing, the cortisol that was released in their brain. And it really causes when there is an absent in adult. And that is a key figure and key important point that we need to really know and understand as educators, as really parents and caregivers, to make sure that we are there for them. If the child is going through any kinds of stressors, that we are there to help them out. Because if there's an absence of stress, the child feels that there is no reprieve, there is no end in sight. And unfortunately, the part of the brain that now gets activated is the amygdala. It's called the reptile brain, where it's
Mhm.
again fight and flight, which is, like I said, is good for you for a brief spike in the cortisol that is secreted in
Mhm.
their brain. But if it's constant and it's no end in that, that actually, the higher doses of cortisol in their brain really kills their brain cells and their amygdala to disproportionately become bigger than the other organs, which is the other part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex that is shut down, and it's really harmful to the children.
So do you think, Sister Azra, okay, this toxic stress, is it something that we should be concerned about as parents?
Absolutely, I think that we are, alhamdulillah, we as parents, we need to make sure that they are not confronted by certain stressors on a consistent basis, right?
Okay.
I wanted to kind of get back to the rat example, which kind of makes a lot of sense to me, as when I present as well, is that, when I was mentioning the rat that has been taken
Mm-hmm.
out for 15 minutes at a time, but
Mm.
now instead of 15 minutes, when they did another study where they took out the rat for about 2-3 hours at a time,
Mm.
and what they found was the rat was so traumatic and stressful because of that situation. They put the rat back to the mom, and they were not able to mingle or cuddle. That
Mm.
unfortunately damaged the rat's brain to the point where they were stressed throughout their lives. So
Okay.
absolutely, we need to be able to make sure that there's always a presence in the child's life if they're going through any traumatic situation in their life.
Mm. Okay. So, so with stress, okay. So, okay, for human beings, we're all unique. We're all unique in our ability. We're all unique in our capabilities. We're all unique in what we're able to tolerate, our strengths, our weaknesses. So, does this also apply to stress? Like, for example, are there varying threshold levels that we're all differently attuned to, and that we're then is monitoring how we can deal this with the stress that's presented to us?
That's a really good question. Yes, there are variations. And for
Mm.
example, you might, because again, it's adult or the children, the stressors are there, right? And
Mm.
you might find maybe someone who, even in your friend circle, may seem really relaxed or uh, doesn't bothered by a lot of situations. And you might find someone else with the same situation really reactive to that. And even the slightest problem will give them stressors, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
same thing with children, that children are also in different situation. They some really perceive some situation as just simple bumps or simple challenges that will be passed, that could be patterns, that doesn't trigger their cortisol as much as the other who might think that this is too much for them. And I wanted to kind of point out the study that was made by the Chase and Thomas, who did a pioneering study on what we call a temperament. And they
Mm.
found that the children are born with different temperament. Some of them are born with easygoing temperament. Some of them are cautious or shy, or some of them may be very difficult to handle, right? I mean,
Hmm.
it's even
Hmm.
in our own family, we find our boys, my
Mm.
boys, we have different temperaments.
Yeah.
And what we found that based on the study that I did, they actually call them dandelion children, where
Mm.
they easy bounce back and maybe more resilient than the others who are maybe the orchard children, who are more sensitive to the environment. And they found that they flourish on parents who are calm and nurturing, but unfortunately struggle with the parents who are anxious. So we really
Mm.
need to kind of if the parents lack that knowledge of their children
Hmm.
and that temperament that they have, they
Hmm.
might or say or do something that might really deter their resilient mindset.
Right. So, it's interesting how you mentioned, and I think it's a really good analogy because dandelions we associate with strength and perseverance, like they're everywhere, and we don't even try and they flourish. Whereas something as gentle and as beautiful as an orchid, um, you look at it and you feel it needs that nourishment and that love. So it's lovely the way you made that analogy. And I'm sure all of the viewers, all of you parents out there, I'm sure you can relate to this type of analogy to the children, inshallah, that you have, in your lives as well. Now, it's interesting. Okay, so the children have their own levels, their own thresholds of which to deal with and adapt to, and face the stressors that they'll be coming. But that's because that's when they're independent within themselves. But children are within a family unit, right? So
Mhm.
they live with brothers and sisters, and they live with adults, parents and guardians. So when they're within this family unit, for example, with the parents in that unit, how does the stress that the parents are going through impact on the children? So now we're talking about not just the stress the kids have within themselves. Now they're within this family unit and they're surrounded by family members who have their own set of stressors. How does this impact on them?
Oh, that is a really good question because yes, we are social animals, right?
Yeah.
We do not live in isolation. We need to be able to be interactive with everyone else,
Mm,
and especially the children, as I was mentioning before. Context plays a huge role. Environment
yeah.
plays a huge role, and as I mentioned to you before, that are the caregiver, the educator, the person who is in and out with that individual or that child plays a big role. And sometimes um, what we say or do impacts them greatly. And how we behave with our children and how we really respond to their needs. And during their moments of temper tantrum or some mistakes they made, how we react to them either reduces their stress, or exasperate their struggles and
Mm,
strength. So we need to
mm,
really go back to what I was saying, is to be able to understand that child and know that the child is going through their own self-regulation. It's the time where they are when they're young, especially when they're young, because that's the time that they're malleable. Their brain are still developing, and that's the time that they're learning to self-regulate themselves. That's the time they're
mhm,
willing to know how to manage their stress, right? Stress management itself, learn from there. And then during their temper tantrum, we need to be able to know how to deal with them. And what
yeah.
happens is sometimes we ourselves go through some stress ourselves. COVID-19 is probably the best example. It's right here. But even any stressors that we go through that I mentioned before, death in the family or any issues that we go
Mm,
through, we tend to um, pass that anxiety onto our children, and
okay.
that is very harmful for them. um, and 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 there are a lot of factors. I mean, I have, for example, um, we force our children, and I was just trying to say that before I say that, I wanted to say that there are several parenting styles, right? There's a whole study done by Bloomberg, who talked about permissive parenting, uninvolved parenting. There's authoritative and authoritarian parenting, the different types of parenting that really stresses on the more love or warmth, or the more strictness or demand and control the child has. So
Okay.
we as parents, depend on how we parent our children, do that. But what we unfortunately do is what we call secondhand stress. When we talked about how do we,
Mm,
translate stress, and secondhand stress is the stress that we have because of that issue, something that's happening in our household, or again, family members, and we tend to kind of translate that to our children, and that's really harmful. And what children
mm,
sometimes think, what we talked about, our children are very great observers but very lousy interpreters, because what they think
mm,
is that if there's something going on, if there's a tension in the house, they think it's because of them. They are the reason why things are happening, because they don't interpret it that well. But
mm,
maybe the real underlying reason is something else. So
mm,
we need to be able to be mindful and to make sure that we are with the child, letting them know that it's not them, that things are
mm.
happening, and we need to work with the
Okay.
children.
So a question has come up from one of the viewers, and before we address this question, I just want to hone in on one positive aspect that the parents are able to do for the children. And the reason I want to do this is because I think it's very important to make sure the parents realize that their role as a parent they're very caring, they're very nurturing, and that must also have an effect on the stress that the child or their children are going through. So I just, Sister Azra, if you don't mind, just to address that role, what role does a parent play during stressful situations that will enable them to buffer the stress the child is going through? And once you address that, then I'll bring up the question that Sister
Mhm.
has raised. But I
Okay.
think it's really, really important that the parents who are listening today, you have a positive impact on your children. So, Sister Azra, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's so amazing. It's so fascinating to learn, and also liberating to know that you have control over what can happen to your child in that sense, where what you can do to
Mhm,
them. And
mhm,
a large body of evidence have actually shown that reciprocal, positive, and responsive relationship with a child actually
mhm,
helps them to grow. And there's also a research that was done, and I think it's so important to learn about the research, because there's several research out there. One of the research that was done by families, what they did was it's a longitudinal research where they took families, and divided into three different groups of families, and one family received nutrition and supplement for healthy growth of the child. Next family received more guidance and support that geared
mhm,
towards really focusing on their play and interaction and learning and cognitive growth. And the third control group didn't receive anything.
mhm,
And so longitudinal study, they had found that over 20 years down, they noticed that the children from the parents group who had nutrition, or who the control group had no change in their ability, versus the group that received that parental feedback, and the way that
mhm,
they were able to interact with their children when they're young
mhm,
actually
mhm,
had an impact, where their IQ was improved. Um,
mhm,
25% of their growth market, they were improved. So basically they earned better. So there are a lot of research that shows exactly what I mentioned, where it does have a huge impact on the
mhm,
child's ability. And I just, before I
mhm,
go to that question, I wanted to say that, yeah, we also say that, yes, of course I'm going to take care of my child, but sometimes we want to really also look at the research, the brain research that I started off with, right? And
mhm,
I was fascinated to learn that there's a chemical in the brain that is secreted, and that's called the oxytocin. And oxytocin is it's the way we interact with the children triggers that oxytocin that actually helps the child buffer those circumstances that we've been talking
mhm.
about.
So, that's really interesting you say that because the way you interact with your child. So, for example, that could mean you listen to your child. You have some sort of empathy in listening. So, have you heard of that phrase, Sister Azra, where they say, it's okay to not be okay? So it's if the child is saying to the parent that, look, this is what's this, I'm just not feeling too good about this, or this is a little bit too stressful, or
Hmm.
this is a little bit hard to get through.
Hmm.
Care comes through from the parent. That empathetic listening comes through the parent. And they're saying, it's okay to not be okay. We'll work through this. So the parents don't necessarily have to provide an answer, right? That
Hmm.
they can be there to say, I'm listening, I'm with you, and we'll work through this together, right?
I love that, because
Yeah.
what you're saying is exactly what we call the empathic listening, right? Empathic
Yeah.
listening, yeah, empathic listening is just the fact that we are there for our children when they need us. And
Yeah.
listening, not to respond, listening to
Mm-hmm.
actually understand without judgment. Not
Okay.
judging them is to, okay, you know, what they're really saying, that you're sometimes you formulate a answer when the child is or person is saying something, but really listen to them. What that really also mean is to putting ourselves in their shoes. But that
Mm,
doesn't mean that we're agreeing on everything. It's just mean that yes, we really understand you, and we validate what you're saying to the child. When they feel that they're validated, when they feel that there's someone who I can share, and someone who actually listen to me, makes a big difference. And it actually builds resilience in children, because resilient children demonstrate that capacity to communicate their feelings and thoughts,
Mm.
and they
Mhm.
learn from models like their own parents.
So the term resilience is very important. We're going to come back to it, inshallah, but I really do want you to address that question that sister brought up before. How do we know if a child is just stressed or has the beginning of poor mental health?
That's a really good question. I think that the depending on the child's ability, right? We want to be able to first figure out what is happening to the child by their reaction, their behavior, their attitude, right? Is the child all of a sudden change? Is there a change in their behavior because something that they're going through? So it's for us to, again, going back to that, empathic listening actually helps them understand what is really happening, because like I said, their physical structure of the child changes when they're going through a lot of stress. Their cortisol becomes high, and they're not able to eat well, or they're not able to sleep well. So those are the different things that the child is going through when they're stressed. Prolong that, and if you are there for them and still there is something going on, it's time to go to the doctor and really definitely check out if there's anything else going on underlying with them. So you absolutely have to involve expert in this situation.
Okay, that's really good. And thank you so much for that question.
Mhm.
Um, we have an important point that you mentioned about behavior just now in response to that question. And I wanted to ask you that sometimes how can parents recognize that a child is going through stress? Because, for example, if a child has reached a particular development milestone, and maybe a younger child who has just reached potty training and they're very well equipped with that and they understand now the process of going to the bathroom, for example, and suddenly the parents notice a regression in that behavior. So could it be that stress will heighten sometimes a regression in your development? And could that also be a flag that could be raised that parents could help to understand that this could be something to look out for?
Yes, absolutely. As I was mentioning before, that it has to do with the pattern of the child's behavior. We
Mhm.
as adult, we as teachers, when they're in school, when parents, of course, when they see a child and they already establish that the temperament of this child is, for example, like a dandelion child, or a child who is
Mhm.
able to cope with
Mhm.
stressors that are not as severe as before, and all of a sudden the child is now unable to cope, or there's other things that's going on with them, like for example regression on his behavior, or not able to or temper tantrum, for example, more temper tantrum than normal. Those are the kind of situations where you want to really talk to them to see that maybe something is going on with them in school, or somewhere that is outside the home, if you are unaware of what's happening in the home. But if there is something going on where there is, like I mentioned, tolerable stress, right? Tolerable stress,
Mm.
where
Mm.
there is a stress in the house. There is a family member who is ill because of COVID, for example. So it is not natural for the child to respond to that in this kind of situation where there is a change in pattern. But we know that what the problem is, and we're there for them, and we help them cope and recover. Cope and recover is
Mhm.
important. So give them time to cope and recover. And you find that after a threshold of cope and recover, you still feel that it is getting aggravated. That's the time that you need to say, okay, let's go and figure out what is really going on and meet the
Mhm.
pediatricians.
Mm. Okay, Sister Azra, uh, some questions have come through that some of the parents listening here, they want to ask or get more ideas from you based on your experience. Can you go through some of the things or suggest some things to us of how, as parents, we can build resilience? So now we're now going to start focusing on. We have, alhamdulillah, a really good idea now of what stress is in children. Now let's work on, as parents, how we can help them. So through some suggestions from yourself, if you don't mind.
You know, when we talk about resilience, I I usually look at if you can imagine a concrete, and there's a crack in the concrete, okay? And you pass that all the time, but one day you find a flower blooming from that concrete. You have to say that that flower is resilient because it has fought through the concrete, difficult structures, and yet found its way up and was able to bloom. So resilience is when you see that the child is able to, again, see these stresses that are going on, but yet still able to, flourish with that. And we need to give them that ability. We need to cultivate that resilience in our children. And I think first thing foremost, I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us ability to be resilient in ourselves. And when I wanted to look at the ayats, and to be honest with you, this last year has these two ayat has resonated with me. One is the ayat that in Shura, where it says "Fa'inamal yusra yusra," which is with difficulty comes relief. Imagine sitting with your child and being able to talk to them about that specific ayat, to say that, hey, yes, you are going through difficulty, but that Allah is promising you relief. That itself
Alhamdulillah.
is a resilience,
Alhamdulillah.
because you
Yeah.
wanted to tell that child that, Allah also says that life is not going to be pretty. Life is not going to be without stress. And Allah has promised you. In one of the another ayat that really has resonated with me is called, I'm trying to remember, I think it's Balad. And it says, فَإِنَمَا yusra yusra, right? Or no, not that is the one, but there's another ayat that I'm, وَلَكَنَ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي كَبَدٍ is one of the ayat that resonates with me, is we have created mankind in hardship. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising us that we are going to be creating you in hardship. So there will be hardship. So get ready for that. But then we also will provide relief. So I think the first thing foremost is to really talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then I talked about being empathic listening. Another thing that I would talk about is to really allow children to make mistakes, give them opportunity to make mistakes. And because we want the child to be resilient, and resilient children tend to perceive mistakes as opportunities for growth. And in contrast, for children who feel that there is no hope, and they that's called a fixed mindset, and where they run away from challenges. So we really want to give them that growth mindset, and that's also part of ways to cultivate resilience in children. And I wanted to also say another way to do is to really provide them responsibility. Give them responsibility to do things. And actually, it does kind of bounce back to being allowing them to take mistakes, because sometimes we fear that they might get things wrong, and we don't allow them to do some things just in the fear that they might break something or anything. But on the other hand, we need to understand that actually develops their confidence, their self-efficacy, and their ability to now be saying that if they were able to, transfer a bowl from a kitchen to the dining table, for example, without falling, give them that confidence. Hey, I can do it. So you need to be able to give them opportunities to be a helping person, help everyone. Pass water in the masjid, for example. Just different ways to give them opportunities to do that, and also help them solve problems and give them decision. I think that's one of the biggest thing I feel, that allow them to make decisions is probably the biggest thing. And obviously, developmentally ready, you don't want to give them make decisions on everything, but something that could allow them to, what dresses, what they could or could not dress, or just different things that is not high stakes. Allow them to make mistakes and allow them to make decisions, really develop their resilience.
Okay. So, there's some questions coming through, and there was one from Sister Fatima. If you could mention some books that parents can use as reference or refer back to, that explain some of the stress concepts that we've been talking about so far.
I do have one book that I just really love, and I think that's a book that I've started off with. It's called The Self-Directed Learner by
Okay.
Ted Cox. I'm trying to remember Ted Johnson and Ted Cox, I believe. I will clarify with you. But self-driven child allows it really helps us to really put the mindset of how we develop resilience and yeah, I think that will be a good book read for the parents.
Okay. Let's draw your attention, Sister Azra, to the
Hmm.
screen. Brother Ali, a question has come through from him. In your opinion, what
Hmm.
are the ways in which parents can deal with unconscious bias by teachers at school?
Hmm. What are the ways? Can you repeat that again?
Yeah. In your opinion, what are the ways in which parents can deal with unconscious bias by teachers at school?
Hmm. So I think that we need to understand that teachers are really there to teach their children, and what we teach, from a point of view of a, from a school. What I can
Mhm.
say that we provide our teachers with these learning opportunities, and we want to make sure that what, like for example, what I've been talking to you about, we want to make sure that we share with our teachers, right? And we want to make sure that we allow them to you treat everybody with equity, and make sure that we communicate that to our students, that we are helping, and we are or not discrim but differentiating our education and our teaching mechanism or strategies based on their ability, and not that there is any bias or anything, or there is any um, favoritism or anything. So we need to be, it's basically communication is important, and really seeking to understand if there is a concern with a teacher or a parent. I think it's on you to make sure that we have that conversation with that teacher or that parent, to make sure that we clarify those issues.
So I think you're right. I think absolutely communication is extremely important. Sister Fatima, another question is, what are the warning signs that children's stress levels are at a concerning level? So this is similar to what was addressed prior. Yeah?
Yeah, it is. It is very similar. And I think that the fact that you as a parent are there for them,
Mhm.
and you are there to, what we call, um, seen. You're there. Their essence. There's seen. You are present. You soothe them. When the child is going through something, you're soothing to them, and then they feel secure. Going back to the same process
Mhm.
where your presence itself makes a big difference. And sometimes we think that as parents we need to do something, we need to, give them advices, or all those. Really, you just need to be there. Because
Mhm.
when the child comes to come home, and depending on what level of the child, maybe a teenager who has all sorts of stressor outside the home,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And you don't know, is there maybe they had a fight with their friends, or there's too much homework, or there's they might not be able to, or they might fail, maybe a quiz or a test that was high stake. They
Mhm.
come home with a lot of stress, right? And we need to be able to not add to that stress. That's one big thing. We need to be able to sit with them on a daily basis. I basically recommend them to, before they even go to sleep, to just sit with them and be with them and figure out what is going on. So going back to that same situation, that check the pattern of their behavior. You know your child more than anybody else, right? So you need to be able to, you are the best judge of your child's ability. You're the best judge of your child's temperament. You're the best
Mhm.
judge if you feel that the child is bordering, and how to cope and recover with them is to be able to ask them, do you need help? Do you need help to maybe talk to someone? If you feel that the level is kind of going, and again, I'm assuming that this is a teenager child, because when they're young, there are other things, there are potty training issues, or there are other,
Mhm.
other issues like that. But when they're teenagers, like I said, there's so many things they don't say. I have teenage boys, so I'm telling you right now that, how are you doing? And they would like, good. But really, something else is going on, and you kind
Mm,
of see in their pattern. But
mm,
trust me, when you go and sit with your child on a daily basis, just again, like I said, how are you doing? And just sit with them. And I am telling you, they will understand that you're there for them, and they might open up. You
mm.
want them to open up. When they open up,
Yeah.
you are able to help them out.
Inshallah, that's really interesting. I want to invite our viewers. Alhamdulillah, there's been a lot of really good and interesting points that are raised in stress and understanding stress in children, and now building resilience to help children manage that stress. So please do continue to send your questions through. And inshallah, while we have Sister Azra with us and her expertise, we'll do our best to address them. Sister Azra, it's now well established that parents play, mashallah, a pivotal role in helping children manage their stress. But when you are helping someone through something, you are tapping into your own resources. So, for example, your energy levels, your strength, your peace of mind, your well being, you're tapping into all of that in order to help somebody else. So, the role of the parent helping their child, what important message can we relay to the parents who are doing this about realizing that you as well are important in this equation?
Oh my gosh. I think that's a really good question. And thanks for asking that question, because and raising that point, because it's so important, right? We established, as you said, that parents are just pivotal in the growth of their children.
Mm-hmm.
And we play a huge role. And like I mentioned, you have a child who is stressful, going through a few things. We have to make sure it's tolerable stress, and we do that by making sure that we allow them opportunities to cope and recover. But we need ourselves to be able to be in a position where we are successfully able to provide that support to
Yeah.
them. Now, to do that, are we are we in stress? So we need to figure out our own stress level. That is a very good point, because we cannot put, I'm sure you heard of a very common talk that we say that we cannot put, we cannot, we need to first put mock oxygen on our own face before putting it
Mm.
onto our child, right? So we
Yeah.
need to be able to be in a position and a mental capacity and a level to cope and work with our children. And sometimes we find ourselves struggling with that, especially with so many things going on.
Mm.
Either it's pre-COVID, there are a lot of factors, right? Or
Mm.
post-COVID, that we are in a situation right now. We go through a lot of stress, loss of, for example, a job or anything like that. And the effects of stress on the body is huge on ourselves, even adults, not just the children. We a lot of studies that was done, and they found how stress in adults causes blood pressure. It causes the headaches and rapid breathing, and the stomach ache, and just bad eating habits. A lot of problems happen. So
Mm.
we need to be able to figure out our own stressors. And really, I think there's two things we need to do. First thing is to understand and acknowledge that you are under pressure, that you are under stress. Sometimes we don't want to acknowledge that, and then that's where the problem comes in. Yes, I am stressed right now. If I'm able to say that, then I can do something about it. Then I can
Mm.
manage my stress. So I'm actually now
Mm.
kind of moving on to the adult stress right now, right? So, but it's important to know our own strength. And once
Mm.
we know that we are stressful, we would have to manage it, find different techniques, maybe,
Mm.
uh, being able to maybe get some support system from others, um, and really, and maybe even allow the children to know that yes, I'm stressful. It's normal, perfectly normal to say that, to a child, if they're under stress, and the child is coming into you for something and you are under stress, it's okay to say to the child, that is an important thing. I really want to talk to you about it, but I am right now under stress. Can we talk to this about this in the morning? Instead of
Mm.
blowing up or not be able to deal with it, you can postpone that if it's possible. or defer it to another, significant others, or the other parent or someone else that we,
Mm.
until we catch ourselves, we need to be able to find ways to cope with it.
So, it's really interesting you say that because uh, as a parent, please, parents, remember, look after yourselves, and that will enable you to look after your children. You know what? There's some literature out there that was really interesting based on parents' emotions and parents' reactions, and they said that even in children young as 3 months, those children can feel like when if their parent is sad or angry, children young as 3 months can actually feel that from the parent. And then they, in turn, will feel that emotion themselves. So, it's so important, the points that you highlight, that the well being of a parent and their mind frame to manage their own stress level and manage their own emotions, it's so, so important, because the last thing we want to do is feed that into our children and exacerbate whatever situations that, they may be going through.
Yeah.
Sister Azra, thank you so much. We have a few minutes left on this podcast. So I invite parents again, please send through your comments and questions so Sister Azra, inshallah, can address them. But, can you, okay, there's a question that has come up. My son has started to develop tics. We first thought it was a form of stress from lockdown. However, his tics have not gone away, and he is doing them while he is relaxing. Is there any advice you can give?
Wow.
Hmm.
So, right, I mean, when the child is in a such stressful situation, and if we don't catch them on time,
Mhm.
they may able to do some things, or they may develop some patterns of behavior that may or may not be the best for them, right? And we wanted to kind of change that pattern behavior. Um, I think that it's important to, at that point, um, address that by talking about it, talking to the
Mhm.
child as to why they're behaving the way they're behaving, and let them talk it out. And then I would then say that, like I said, you have to involve your pediatrician immediately to see
Mhm.
that what do they recommend, because
Mhm.
I'm not a doctor, I wouldn't be able to diagnose that, but I would have to say that just the fact that you're aware of that you're there for them, and immediately be able to proactively work on trying to resolve that, is probably the best option for you.
And I think you're very right. If we want to seek out medical advice, it's
Mhm.
better that we actually do it rather than not, just for our own sake of peace
Right.
of mind and just to ensure also. Do you think that sometimes she mentioned lockdown and ticks during lockdown, and now that lockdown is phasing out, sometimes is there like a delayed reaction to dealing with stress? And after the stress is removed, we can still be, our bodies are still coping and dealing with how to manage it. Could that also be something?
You know, when we talk about resilience, we, and the what we call the tolerable stress, um,
Yeah.
it's important to learn that each situation the child goes through in that stressful situation, the second time that child goes to the same situation, as
Mm,
long as there is coping and recovering, which is important,
yeah.
then our part of the brain that's called the hippocampus actually learns that, oh, wait a minute, it happened before, now I can
Mm,
deal with it better. So
mhm,
there's a huge chance that the child would be able to recover when that issue and that concern has passed out. But
mhm,
again, back to seeking medical advice would be first.
yeah. So, Sister Azra, a question came up from Brother Abdullah that he said that his daughter, I believe his daughter is worrying, or she has a worry, but she's not opening up. So I know my child is worrying, but she won't tell me why. How
Hmm.
can I get her to open up?
I would love to know the age of that child, because you know, if the child is a teenager, for example, if the child
Mhm,
is at that age where they're 14, depending on, preteen or tween or whatever you want to call it, um, there is a phase in the child's life. And again, I'm not sure if this is your first child or second child. I basically I have four children, four boys who I went through and I'm still going through, and they don't share right away. And it has to be that building of that relationship with that child that requires back to how you're dealing with that child when the child makes a mistake or when the child is going through that stressors. How do you respond to that? It's very
Mm.
important. So when the child is not opening up, I think it's providing that opportunity for them to open up. Maybe if, depending on if you're with other sibling or there's more children in the house, but I have to find a time where I'm with my child alone. And the best time that I usually find is when they're about to go to sleep. I sit on their bed, and you might find other ways, other places, or other opportunities. But for me, and I sit with them and I say, "So how things are going?" And obviously they're going to say, "Good." But then you still continue to sit. You
Yeah.
still kind of stroke them. Trust me, at some point, maybe not the first day, maybe not the second day, as long as you develop that, they know that the mom and dad will come in and be with them, they will open up, because the child is sometimes screaming for help, but they cannot really articulate it. And
Mm.
sometimes when they're bubbling up and you're there for them, that's it, you got them. So
Mm.
wait for more. Inshallah, may Allah subhanahu help you deal with their child, and inshallah they're able to open up so that you can help that child more better.
I think that's absolutely, absolutely a positive thing that you said, that they're sensing the presence of a caring parent, a nurturing parent beside them. And when they're ready, they know that that parent is there, to guide them and to help them through this. Sister Azra, we have a few minutes left.
Mhm.
Is there any takeaway points you'll be able to give our parents?
Um, yeah, I think that what I would really say is that sometimes we want to really nurture our children, and to do that, we control children too much. We don't
Mm.
allow them to flourish as much. Um, we don't allow them to make mistakes as much as we could, because we want to take care of them. We don't want them to get hurt, right? We don't want them to stress out, right? But we need to kind of step back and think about, remember how we talked about sometimes stress is good. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that I will be providing you, I will be giving you, there will be hardship. So allow them to stress out, or I should say, allow them certain opportunities where, again, you are there for them, but give them a challenge. Let them let them have that challenge. Um, you as a parent or a caregiver must be there to support them, but really also give them the opportunity to grow. You know how we call the a different analogy that can give the caterpillar and the butterfly, right? A
Mm.
caterpillar is not going to become a butterfly until unless they struggle inside the caterpillar. They have to kick, they have to scream, they have to be able to do that, and then they come out into a beautiful butterfly. And imagine you're saying, no, 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 I don't want you to kick, I don't want you to struggle, because that then they won't be able to come out as a butterfly. Or another
Mm.
example that I would like to give is that a plant in a pot, that you want to make sure you water them, you take care of them, you provide them sunlight, and the pot is growing, or the pot, or the plant is grown enough so that the plant is bigger than the pot now. It's time for you to put it into the garden, or else you
Yeah.
will strangle them. So you want to
Mm.
make sure that you provide them that opportunity.
And you know what's important in all of that is when you're allowing your children to grow through these experiences, you're providing them the safety net within which to do it.
Absolutely.
So that's such an important point for parents to keep in the forefront of their minds, because you're not letting your child go into the unknown abyss. You're keeping them within a safety net, and within that net, you're guiding and nurturing their growth. And they're growing through their experiences, which will be up and down, good and bad. And that's how they grow. Um, I really want to thank Sister Azra. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. There's been a lot of comments that have come through, and unfortunately, we were not able to address all of them. But if anyone wants to refer back to this podcast, Sister Azra, you're the best principal ever,
Oh,
mashallah. Onali
thank you so
Samji,
much.
mashallah.
Oh,
Exactly.
thank you so much.
Alhamdulillah.
With
Alhamdulillah.
Allah's tawfiq, jazakallah khair.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. If any of the parents or anyone wants to refer back to the podcast, it will be available on the Jaffrey Academy YouTube channel as well as on the Facebook. Once again, I want to thank you on behalf of all of us at the Jaffrey Academy for joining us this evening, which is your afternoon, and to all of the parents who've joined us this evening. It's been wonderful to have you part of this experience. And inshallah, if you do have any more questions and we were not able to address, please do feel free to email them through to the Jaffrey Academy. And inshallah, we may be able to forward them to Sister Azra, and her help and support will continually guide us through these through these situations and through these questions and queries that we may have coming through. So thank you very much, everyone. And inshallah, please stay safe and well and look after your children as well as yourselves. Fi aman Allah. Khadafis. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.